In just a few minutes, the Senate will begin a debate on the dozens of various federal water, coastal, environmental projects. Until then, we're going to, during this quorum call, show you some more of today's Senate Agriculture Committee hearing live as amendments are considered to the Farm Bill.
By taking the rolling Olympic average that we use in the ARC program and also using it in the AMP program as well. And so these are significant reforms that are certainly, in the case of the amendment on Title I, emphasize a market-based system and very much appreciate that. So, Senator Coughlin, I don't know if you have any comments on the en bloc amendment at this point.
Madam Chair, I'm happy to join you in urging approval of the amendment.
Thank you. Are there any other comments on the en bloc amendment? If not, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay. It's adopted. We'll now move through in the order of the titles that we did as we marked up last year. We will start first, just to run through so everyone's aware, the miscellaneous title, then on to conservation, trade, horticulture, research, credit, rural development, forestry, energy, nutrition, commodity programs, and finally, crop insurance. So we are open at this point in Title 12, the miscellaneous title, for any amendments.
Chairwoman Stabenow, I ask to be recognized to offer Cowan Amendment number 1.
Senator Cowan.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. This amendment is actually would benefit the farmers of the sea, as I referenced in my opening remarks a few weeks ago. This amendment will provide disaster relief for coastal states by requiring that funds transferred under the Saltonstall-Kennedy Act be used by the Department of Commerce in the way the law was intended, and not necessarily in the way they're being used today. As this committee knows, fishing is a critical part of Massachusetts. It's central to our culture and our economy. The commercial fishing industry supports over 77,000 jobs in Massachusetts. Unfortunately, this way of life for generations of families is facing a serious challenge after a series of federal Gulf of Maine groundfish surveys have shown dramatic declines in stocks. Just this month, fishermen in the Northeast are living under a cut of up to 77% of the number of fish they catch. As a result of these problems, last year the Secretary of Commerce declared a fishing disaster for the Northeast. Similar fishing disasters have occurred in Mississippi, Alaska, and other coastal states last year. The Senate Sandy Supplemental Appropriations Bill included $150 million in disaster assistance for fishing areas, which received a disaster declaration from Commerce in 2012. Unfortunately, this was not included in the final bill. The Saltonstall-Kennedy Act established a fund from tariffs to the U.S. Customs Service on imported seafood and ocean products. Under the law, the proceeds from the tariffs are transferred by the Secretary of Agriculture to the Secretary of Commerce to be used only for fisheries research and development projects related to U.S. commercial and recreational fisheries. Unfortunately, in recent years, the Department of Commerce has failed to comply with the intention and letter of the law. Instead, the Department of Commerce has been using the SK funds for the general operations of NOAA and not for fisheries research and development projects as the law requires. What this amendment would do would require that the Secretary of Agriculture provide up to $100 million from the tariffs collected in the next fiscal year to provide disaster assistance for fishing areas, including the Northeast states, Mississippi, and Alaska, which received a disaster declaration from the Department of Commerce last year. This amendment would also require the Secretary of Agriculture to withhold future transfers of the tariffs under the SK Act until the Secretary is assured by the Department of Commerce that the funds will be used as the law requires. This is a simple amendment. We don't allow citizens to determine for themselves whether they should comply with the laws passed by this committee in Congress, and we shouldn't allow federal agencies to do so either. Now, Madam Chair, I know that there are some concerns still about this amendment, so I will withdraw it for now, because I understand there's some conversations and work with additional stakeholders that needs to happen, and I intend to bring it to the floor.
Thank you very much. I appreciate your willingness to withdraw. We certainly want to hear from members on this amendment. Do we have? Yes, Senator Gillibrand.
I would like to associate my remarks with Senator Cowan. I agree strongly that the funds should be used as this committee has directed those funds to be used. And because of the nature of extreme storms that have taken place all across this country, our fisheries have been hit very hard. Hurricane Sandy hit New York fisheries very hard, Massachusetts fisheries, Maine fisheries, Rhode Island fisheries, straight along the coast. And we need to be able to have the money necessary to do the research and development to make sure these industries continue to thrive given the extreme storms that we've seen in the past few years. So I strongly support Senator Cowan's amendment, and I know there is consensus among many of the senators who experienced these very significant losses in the last few years.
Senator Johanns.
Madam Chair, I would like to call up my amendment to repeal mandatory country of origin labeling. This amendment would repeal coal for livestock and poultry. Regardless of the merits of the idea, we have bitten off more than we can chew. Now we face the prospect of up to $2 billion in retaliation from Canada and Mexico. But the significant piece of this, Madam Chair, is that Canada and Mexico are two of our biggest trading partners in agriculture. The proposed solution from USDA would be even more of a burden for everyone across the value chain. Instead of labeling meat product of the U.S. and Canada, now we would have to say born and raised in the U.S. and slaughtered in Canada. And you can't even commingle meat from animals that don't fit that exact combination. Talk about a regulatory nightmare. Even if the WTO somehow determines that this doesn't cause discrimination against Canadian and Mexican cattle, it's poor policy. If consumers want cattlemen and other livestock producers to incur the expense of tracking the movements of their animals, there are ways to do that in the marketplace that don't require a federal mandate. Now, I recognize there's a difference of opinion in this committee on repealing COOL at this time, so I will not ask for a roll call vote. However, I hope we can resolve this issue before some of our largest trading partners retaliate against our exports. Madam Chair, with that, I withdraw the amendment.
Thank you very much. We'll look forward to working with you on it. You've raised some important issues.
Madam Chair,
Yes, Senator.
if I could just
Cameron.
comment on that, Senator Johanns has brought up really an excellent point, and I go back to then Chairman Roberts and mine days in the House when his ranking member, Charlie Stenholm, used to give the example that I've used over and over of when it comes to labeling where a meat product comes from, if the cow, if the slaughtered animal was raised in Georgia but was the product of a heifer that was born in Canada and was sent to Georgia and was artificially inseminated by a bull from Mexico, where is the country of origin? This is the most confusing issue that I have ever seen in all of my years on the Ag Committee, and I hope maybe Senator Johanns will think about bringing this up on the floor and see if we can't figure out a way to resolve this, because it is confusing. It's causing us problems now with our Mexican and Canadian partners.
Thank you very much. Senator Heitkamp. Senator Heitkamp.
Just a quick comment, and obviously there isn't unanimous opinion on this in this committee, and I've long been a supporter of letting consumers know where their food products come from. I think this is a process where our ranchers and our farmers who have been promoting country of origin labeling have asked repeatedly, and a lot of the dispute and disagreement comes from a lack of clarity from regulators who don't agree with this process. And I think when you look at the WTO, it's been approved. When you look at Canada, they're looking at moving in this direction along with 47 other countries. And so this is a process
I ask the quorum call be dispensed with.
Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. President, in the interest of all senators, and frankly in the interest of the people of this country, we are moving forward on a Water Resources Development Act. The question is, will we be able to clear a list of amendments, some by voice vote, and a further list of more controversial amendments by a recorded vote? I'm hoping that is the case. Senator Vitter and I hope that is the case, that we can get clearance on these packages of amendments. If we do not, we have to decide whether to invoke cloture, which will bring debate to a close. And I would hope if we have to go that way, we have to go that way. But I'm very optimistic that we can get these amendments cleared because, frankly, almost every senator here has a stake in this very important legislation because we have ports that are sometimes on the coast, sometimes they're inland. We have waterways. We all have floods in our states, not all of us, but most of us. And we have environmental restorations in our state with wetlands conservation. We have work to do on our water infrastructure. Our infrastructure in this country has been rated a D+. That is not very heartening. And for the greatest country in the world to have a weak infrastructure, frankly, is not good enough. I want to read a list of supporters for our legislation, and I think what people will notice is how broad-based this list is. They're either representing workers or businesses. They're businesses themselves. They're businesses that need to ship produce and products. So let me read this. And they're environmental organizations. AFL-CIO supports us, the American Association of Port Authorities, the American Concrete Pressure Pipe Association, the American Council of Engineering Companies, the American Farm Bureau, the American Foundry Society, American Public Works Association, the American Road and Transportation Builders, the American Society of Civil Engineers, American Soybean Association, Associated Equipment Distributors, Associated General Contractors, Association of Equipment Manufacturers, the Clean Water Construction Coalition, the Concrete Reinforcing Steel Institute. I guess I can't even go through it all. It's such a very, very long list. I'll ask unanimous consent to place it into the record. We have the National Association of Flood and Storm Management Agencies, the National Governors Association. Do I have that consent? We have the National Stone, Sand, and Gravel Association, the National Waterways Conference, the American Institute of Architects, the National Association of Manufacturers, the Nature Conservancy, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, the United Brotherhood of Carpenters. Now, there's more that I can't even read all this. It's such a long list. The point is, this legislation represents jobs. This legislation represents moving products. This legislation represents flood control. This legislation represents fixing our ports, making sure that we have some reforms here that work well, that make sure that when the Army Corps sets a project timeline, the resource agencies are in the room. Very, very important. And I have to say, as this country sees, there's a lot of partisanship going on. This is a bipartisan bill. Is my friend wishing to speak on this subject or another? All right. So the bill made it through the Environment Committee without a single no vote. And since then, Senator Vitter and I have been working with all senators, whether they're on the committee or off the committee, to meet the needs of their states, to work with them. And I think we've done everything in our power to help every state. You know, the last WRDA bill was 2007. We used to have a WRDA bill every couple of years. But everything has gotten so controversial. And what happened between then and now is a ban on earmarks. And, Mr. President, this bill used to be a bill that listed projects. We can't do that anymore. So what we had to do is figure out a way to fund the needed projects while averting earmarks. And we did it by saying if there's a completed core report, then, in fact, the project can go forward. And we set up a way for future projects to be handled with the local communities coming forward. So I think we really handled that issue. We focused on flood control. We focused on ports and environmental restoration. We have a piece here that deals with the Everglades. If you've never been to the Everglades, it's a national treasure. River of Grass, that's what it's called. It's a magnificent, amazing, fabulous environment, but it needs to be preserved and protected. When I went there with Senator Nelson and went with my spouse, and we went down that through the Everglades, and all of a sudden we see a deer jump up, and the deer is actually living on the water on these little berms. It's the most remarkable thing I've ever seen. We put WIFIA in here based on a program we call TIFIA, which will allow us to help local areas leverage their funds, build these projects quicker. So it goes on and on. We have terrible threats from flooding from places like Sacramento, for example, where we're looking at tens of thousands of Californians at risk and $7 billion in property, and we say, okay, it's time to get it done. We look at flood protection for the 200,000 residents of Fargo, North Dakota, and Moorhead, Minnesota, who have been fighting rising flood waters in recent weeks. We'll restore the reliability of levees that protect places like Topeka, Kansas, and it goes on to Texas, and I could name literally every state in the union that has something at stake. I talked about Everglades. Yes.
Will McCullough yield for a moment?
I will.
All right. I thank the senator from California and the chair of the Environmental Committee for the excellent work she's done on this important project. I did want to mention to her that we have in Vermont one small concern that I hope will be addressed in this bill. In Vermont, we suffered through Irene, and it was a devastating experience for many, many communities in the state and businesses. And the problem that we are having now is that we have state regulations which correctly require that culverts be built that can in fact deal with the real problems of flooding. Unfortunately, what FEMA is prepared to pay for is inadequate infrastructure. Culverts, among other things, that will not address the problem if we have to deal with another problem like Irene. So this is a very modest proposal. Senator Leahy and I feel strongly about this issue, and I know the chairperson is sympathetic. There appears to be some problems on the other side. I very much hope that we can resolve this.
Yes. If I could say, there is an amendment, I would say to my friend through the chair, on our list that we have agreed, Senator Vitter and I, that there would probably be a vote on this proposal. I asked my staff, is that correct? On the Leahy amendment, Leahy-Sanders amendment on the culverts. It's on the list, is it not?
I had heard that there was some objection on the other side to this, and that.
Okay, we're trying to work out the objections, but we will have a vote on it if we cannot.
Yeah, they're objecting to vote at this time, and we're working on it.
Okay.
All right. Well, it's very, very important, Leahy and I, that be addressed. Thank you.
Well, we're doing everything in our power, and this, I think, shows the American people right on the floor of the Senate the way senators have been working with us. And I want to say to my friend, I'm so proud he's on the Environment and Public Works Committee and how he's looked after his state. And he has got some very important things in this bill. As a matter of fact, his work on the extreme weather title is very important and would allow us to, prevent these terrible floods before they start. So, yeah, we're looking at things like this in every state. We're trying to do everything in our power to meet every senator's needs. Sometimes what happens is, it's kind of like that pop-up game. Something pops up over here, and it's okay, but then something else pops up over here. So it's the legislative fix we're trying to get to here, the legislative fix, so every state feels comfortable. This is an important bill. There's no other bill that deals with the Everglades. There's no other bill that deals with the Chesapeake Bay. There's no other bill that's possible that would allow us to move forward with these important flood control issues, because when we ended earmarks, we had no way to authorize any programs. So this Boxer-Vitter bill is not just an important bill, it's an essential bill, and we need to move forward. This extreme weather title that I talked about, that Senator Sanders helped us write, it will require the Corps and the National Academy of Sciences to jointly evaluate options for reducing risks related to future extreme weather events. Let me just say that again. Right now, the Corps is not authorized to look ahead and say, given the extreme weather we're having, what is it that we can do across this country to prepare? This study will give us a roadmap to that. Without this bill, we don't have it. Without this bill, we have no reforms in the Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund. People are paying good money into the Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund for dredging our ports, and yet that the full amount of the Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund is not going for those uses. We make moves toward capturing more of those funds. The smaller ports have a good title. The Great Lakes, the seaports that are large donors, such as Los Angeles and Long Beach, make progress. I think it's a win-win. Our bill is certainly not perfect. Every one of us could write it in a way that benefits our states even more. That's a question, starting from the chairman of the committee. But we have to deal with everybody's issues, everybody's concerns, everybody's problems, and we support 500,000 jobs in this bill. Very few bills that come before us that could make that claim. So I think we can show the American people that we can work together. We have this one last stage. We're working so hard. I just want to say to my staff, they're still working. My staff and Senator Vitter's staff have worked non-stop. I'm talking Saturday, Sunday. I'm talking last night. I talked to them. They were still in the office at 11 o'clock. And I just want to praise them. People don't see that. People don't understand that these bills just don't magically appear. And dealing with every senator, I think everyone knows every one of us has very strong personalities. I mean, they really care about their states and fight for their states. It's rough to try and preserve everybody's rights and everybody's wishes. We've worked with Senators Mikulski in a really good way, Senator Shelby. Senator Landrieu has worked hard on this bill, and now she has an amendment that we're trying to dispose of. I hope we'll get the approval to do that. And then once we finish our work, Congressman Schuster, Chairman Schuster over in the House, needs to pass a bill or could take up our bill and pass it. But I think when I read this list to you, and I didn't even get to all of the names, this is one of the broadest coalitions I've ever seen behind any piece of legislation. It is a huge and important coalition. It represents America. It's people who work every day at building the infrastructure, utilizing the infrastructure, making sure that our homes are safe from flooding. The National Governors Association, that's a rarity to have that kind of a list. So all I can say is that these last hours, and it looks like, Gary, do we know yet when we'll have our vote? Okay. At this point, we're supposed to vote at noon, and we'll be back to you with some further comments. And at this point, I would yield the floor so the bill can be reported.
Morning business is closed. Under the previous order, the Senate will resume consideration of S-601, which the clerk will report.
Calendar number 44, S-601, a bill to provide for the conservation and development of water and related resources and so forth and for other purposes.
Under the previous order, the time until 12 noon will be equally divided and controlled in the usual form.
Mr. President, while we discuss how we're going to proceed here, I would ask for a quorum call.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
Mr. President,
Senator from California.
I ask that the quorum call be dispensed with.
Without objection.
I ask that the time during the quorums be divided equally.
Without objection, so ordered.
Note the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
The Senate is working to finish a bill authorizing the nation's water projects. A vote to end debate is set for noon unless an agreement is reached on the remaining amendments. While we wait for a senator to speak, we return to the Senate Agriculture Committee's markup and debate on the Farm Bill.
Some common sense changes to the Agricultural Conservation Easement Program. This amendment addresses an issue that we've heard from land trusts throughout Colorado and other states as well, Nebraska and Kansas, where we've heard from private landowners and preservation groups like the Colorado Agricultural Land Trust. They have concerns over the current financing requirements for some important conservation easements, namely the scenario where a landowner wants to voluntarily donate part of the development value of their land to help finance an easement, but the law limits their ability to do that. This amendment would give the Secretary discretion under special circumstances to waive the non-federal match requirements for high-priority easements, provides the Secretary flexibility to target easements in important places where they otherwise might not occur. That's led the Nebraska Land Trust to support this. I'd ask their letter be included in the record, and the Ranchland Trust of Kansas. In addition to the waiver, the amendment also removes the requirement that no less than 40% of the funding for the Agricultural Conservation Easement Program be used for agricultural land easements. I know this portion of the amendment is critically important to Senator Cochran. I want to thank him and his staff for their help with this amendment. The amendment supported by the Nature Conservancy and the Land Trust Alliance. The CBO has confirmed that the amendment does not score.
Madam Chair?
Yes, Senator Cochran.
Madam Chair, this amendment, as the distinguished senator points out, proposes to remove the 40% funding allocation for land easements within the Agriculture Conservation Easement Program. We've reviewed the amendment. We recommend that it be agreed to. I support it.
And I'd ask for a voice vote on the amendment.
Thank you very much. And I want to thank first Senator Bennett, your efforts as chair of the Subcommittee on Conservation, your long effort in advocating for a great conservation title as well as this amendment, and Senator Cochran for working to really improve the easement program. And I would suggest that we move forward and vote unless there's any other comments. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. The amendment is adopted.
Thank you.
Further amendments. Senator Hoeven.
Madam Chairman, I'd like to present Hoeven Amendment number 6. And what it does is in the manager's package, there's provision for the first time ever that would tie conservation compliance programs and crop insurance together. And since 1985, conservation compliance has been tied to the farm program. So that's already in place and has been since 1985. But this would add a whole new mandate on our farmers saying that even if you don't participate in the farm program and utilize the commodity title and so forth, if you purchase crop insurance, which we want all of our farmers to do because it expands the pool and further diversifies the risk, you're going to be required to undertake the conservation compliance as well. So at a time when farmers and ranchers across this great country are having to deal with more and more.
Mr. President, I ask to vitiate the quorum call.
Without objection.
And Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent to speak for 10 minutes as it's in morning business.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise today to discuss the sexual assault crisis that is facing our military and the need to act immediately to address this problem. Last week, the Department of Defense released a report estimating that over 26,000 service members, and this includes men and women, 26,000 were sexually assaulted in 2012, and this is up from approximately 19,000 in 2010. This is astounding, and this is totally unacceptable. Even more alarming is the fact that the number of cases actually reported remains just a fraction of the total. There's only 13% of these cases that are actually reported. And let me repeat that. That's 13% of assaults were actually reported in 2012. As a member of the Armed Services Committee and a senator from North Carolina, home to the third largest military population in the country, I find these statistics appalling. The brave service members who put their lives on the line should not have to worry about their personal safety on bases in the U.S. and around the world. The men and women who are already tasked with so much, who have vowed to serve and protect our country, should feel that they are afforded the same protection in return, but they don't. The stories that I hear from our female service members are astounding. One woman Marine was raped by an acquaintance, her fellow Marine, in her barracks one night. No one heard her cries for help. The next day, she did report the assault to her chain of command. An investigation was launched from there. And while it was underway from June to January, she was heavily alienated by her peers. She was called derogatory names. Her sergeant major even told her that the assault was her fault because she must have given her rapist the reason to think it was okay. In the end, the official investigation found that her claim was, quote, unfounded because there were no witnesses. And she did not know at the time that she should have gone to the hospital and have a rape kit analysis done. Other service members, women who have served on forward operating bases in Afghanistan, have told me that they limit their water intakes throughout the day, that they won't have to use the latrines in the middle of the night, and by doing so, putting themselves at further risk of being assaulted. No one should ever have to deal with those kinds of concerns, especially when they're already putting their lives on the line to protect our nation. The Department of Defense has reported that half of all service members who were victims of sexual assault say they are actually afraid to report out of fear of retaliation or that their confidentiality will not be maintained. Others feel that reporting the crime will jeopardize their military career. They fear that they won't receive opportunities for advancement, opportunities that they have earned through service to our country. This is just totally unacceptable. The men and women of our armed forces deserve far more. We have to deal with this problem once and for all, and I'm encouraged that the National Defense Authorization Act of 2013 includes specific directives to reduce the alarming number of assaults that take place and often go unreported. Specifically, these provisions include independent review boards to examine how sexual assault cases are handled, the creation of a special victims unit, ensuring convicted offenders are permanently barred from the military, and improving how the military collects data on this topic, and several other needed provisions. During his confirmation process, Secretary of Defense Chuck Hagel said that he was committed to fully implementing these directives. And I urge Secretary Hagel to report to Congress on the progress made as swiftly as possible. But I still believe that Congress should and must do more. Among the steps that I believe we should consider, first, the creation of a special victims council that would include advocates who can support victims and help them report incidents of sexual assault. As I mentioned, too many victims do not come forward because they are either afraid of retaliation, they don't believe their confidentiality will be maintained, and they do not have faith in the military justice system. Just like the example of the woman that I described who had been raped, she did not know that she should have had an analysis of rape actually done. These victim advocates would have given her that advice. Second, we're fortunate in the Senate to have a number of former prosecutors engaged on this issue. Over the last 20 years, they and their colleagues have made great strides in handling sexual assault cases in the civilian world. And I believe we should take the lessons learned from that process to improve the military's response. Lessons including proper training for tackling evidentiary issues and addressing victims' needs. Third, commanding officers can overturn verdicts of jury trials, as happened recently in the Air Force earlier this year. These are commanding officers. They are not appellate judges. They are not legally trained. They should not have the authority to overturn a verdict. I believe we should review that authority as it applies to sexual assault cases, something Defense Secretary Hagel has indicated should be a priority. And finally, we need to explore whether the present Uniform Code of Military Justice is up to the task of addressing the problem of sexual assault. I believe that both the armed forces and the cause of justice would be well served by a vigorous debate in Congress on whether sexual assault cases can be effectively handled within the chain of command or whether this process needs to occur independently. Significant overhauls of the Uniform Code of Military Justice should not be approached lightly. But we owe it to our service members to think outside the box and consider all possibilities. These men and women of our military cannot wait another day, and they should not have to wait another day for this problem to be addressed. I urge my colleagues to join me in taking concrete steps to address this issue and to protect the men and women who sacrifice so much for us each and every day. Mr. President, I notice the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
While we wait for a vote to end debate on the nation's water bill, we're going to return now to the Senate Agriculture Committee's markup and debate on the Farm Bill.
Let me just say, I very much appreciate and understand the dilemma your farmers are facing, and I've heard from people in Michigan as well on these issues. I'm concerned this amendment is written broadly and would have unintended consequences potentially. But I really want to work with you on this. We're monitoring the backlog at NRCS, and they're making progress, but there's more they need to do. I think if we work together, we can move this forward in a way that addresses what I know your concerns are. But at this point, given again where we are and the importance of coming together with all the organizations, I would ask that we not support this amendment at this time. All those in favor say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Those opposed, nay. Nay.
Okay, I'm going to try again.
The nays have it.
Oops, I'm sorry.
Senator Hoeven.
If I may, I'm going to try again to simplify. Please go to Hoeven Amendment number 1. Each of these is an effort to simplify, and I'm going to see it if I can get it down to the point where we actually do simplify something. I'm not sure we will, but this simply says, okay, if we're going to have, this is Hoeven Amendment number 1, it says, hey, okay, we're going to tie you to crop insurance now. You got an unlimited look-back period for your compliance. Well, then, could we at least simplify what the penalty system is? Right now, it's very complicated in terms of the actual penalty that gets applied. This simply replaces the current repayment structure for a farmer found to be in violation of wetland conservation compliance by taking the acres of the specific wetland that's found in noncompliance, multiplied by the average land rent for the county in question for each year in question as determined by the National Ag Service, multiplied by the number of years they're deemed not in compliance. So it's just an effort to simplify the formula if they're found not in compliance. And this has no cost per CBO.
Thank you very much. Again, Senator Hoeven, I appreciate very much what you're trying to do. I think the agreement with all the organizations moving forward on crop insurance does do an excellent job of simplifying and addressing the concerns that you've raised. I think there's a broader discussion that we need to have around simplification and addressing how the traditional tie with conservation compliance works with the commodity title. But at this point, we don't know the ramifications. I'm very concerned about what this does to the agreement from the organizations that are supporting this policy. So I would ask for a no vote at this time and continue to work with you on this. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, aye. Nay. Nay.
All right.
The nays have it. Are there any other amendments on the conservation title?
You think so?
Senator Heitkamp.
I'm speaking today for the bees. We are proposing an amendment today that would keep in mind the importance of pollinators and habitat for pollinators, and try and bring that focus into our conservation programs. As you know, North Dakota is the #1 beekeeping state in the nation. This unique industry benefits not only my state, but it provides economic opportunity and value added to agriculture, especially specialty crops, all across the country. We have had some struggles in the bee world over the last few years, and habitat is critically important. This amendment does not score, but simply says let's put some emphasis on that part of our industry that is so important not only to the honey producers but also to every specialty crop in America.
Thank you very much. Senator Gillibrand.
I'd like to comment on this amendment, which I'm a co-sponsor. Honeybees are absolutely essential for agriculture, and they are in crisis right now because populations are literally dying. More than $20 billion of annual harvests rely on pollination from honeybees. And the colony collapse disorder first surfaced around 2005 and can cause up to about 50% loss of honeybee populations. Now, there's no single cause of colony collapse disorder, but proper honeybee nutrition is a factor that is very important. This amendment is designed to promote good conservation practices that maximize benefits for honeybees. The Pollinator Amendment directs USDA to encourage the protection and enhancement of pollinator habitat as part of the conservation plan. The amendment allows alfalfa and sweet clover varieties to be planted on conservation lands. These plants have been effectively used in the past and are a more cost-effective way of providing pollinator habitat and proper honeybee nutrition. For any state that has any fruits and vegetables growing in them, you know how essential making sure our honeybee population actually survives. There is no technical, man-made or otherwise replacement for the pollination process. So as stewards of the environment, as stewards of our grasslands, as stewards of our farming communities, I urge support of this amendment.
Thank you very much. Seeing no further discussion, Senator
Madam Chair, I just wanted to point out we reviewed the amendment and think it's a good amendment, and I support it.
Thank you very much, and I do as well, and would encourage a yes vote. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay. The amendment is adopted. Thank you very much. Any other amendments to the conservation title?
Madam Chairwoman, on behalf of Senator Leahy, I ask to be recognized to offer Leahy Amendment number 1, of which I am a co-sponsor. Excuse me. Madam Chair, this amendment is simple. It's about equity and fairness, and it's about EQIP. There's currently a separate payment limit for certified organic farmers and farmers transitioning to organic who want to use the Environmental Quality Incentive Program Organic Initiative, the EQIP initiative. This amendment is supported by the American Farm Bureau Federation, the National Sustainable Agriculture Coalition, the National Wildlife Federation, and the American Farmland Trust. I think everyone here can agree that all farmers need equal opportunity to access the natural resource conservation programs and technical assistance. Simply put, this amendment creates equal opportunity for transitioning and existing organic farmers to access EQIP payments and harmonizes the existing payment limit for EQIP, which is many times larger than the organic initiative limit. In doing so, not only does the amendment create equality, it also achieves administrative efficiencies for NRCS, as they only have one payment limit to oversee for a producer. And Madam Chair, I hope you will support this straightforward amendment that creates administrative efficiencies and parity for our organic farmers under EQIP. And Madam Chair, I asked whether you and the ranking member, I asked you for your support for this amendment.
Thank you very much. I appreciate this amendment. I would, at this point, ask that we not support this going forward. We've agreed to a set of payment limits, of which this is a part of it. It was actually originally proposed by the organic community when it was put into place. It really goes to the larger question on payment limits that we've already agreed to in the bill, and at this point, cannot support the amendment.
Well, Madam Chairwoman, with that, I'd withdraw the amendment, and we'll continue to work together with it. And I want to thank all the staff involved with this, and I'll engage with Senator Leahy and others around this amendment.
Thank you very much, and thank you for bringing it forward. Are there any other Senator Hoeven, try again.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chairman. Continuing on the theme, now I'm going to try and simplify the maps. As part of your compliance, you're required, the farmers required, this is Hoeven Amendment number 2. Hoeven Amendment number 2, if they could hand that out. It's in regard to wetland certification maps. So when a farmer does his compliance program, he has to have a wetlands certification map that he has to sign off and certify with NRCS and with the which NRCS approves and so forth, and signs off with FSA. So there are qualifications for making sure that your map's approved, because NRCS may say, well, yeah, that's a wetland, or no, that's not a wetland, or it was a wetland and now it's not. In other words, as weather conditions change, the wetland certifications can be changed, which makes it challenging for our farmers. So again, we're trying to come up with rules to simplify the certification process. Now, Chief White, before with NRCS, before he left, was working with us, had come out to our state, and was working on several proposals to simplify the certification process for these maps. That's this amendment and the next one I'm going to offer. He left before we got finished, but this simply says that if you had a wetland delineated on a map between November 1990 and December of 1996, and NRCS certified that that was a valid map, then you can rely on it. Because there's some question now. Farmers thought they had maps, but the different local offices were kind of doing their own thing, and so there was inconsistency across the country. And this just says, look, if you had a map for that period, you can rely on it. The period's 1990 to 1996 would save a lot of farmers a lot of heartache. And on this one, I'm going to ask for a roll call vote. The senator from Georgia, who I respect very, very much, suggested that I was having a little trouble getting the ayes and nays on the kind of the same timeline. So on this one, I would ask for a roll call.
Thank you.
Madam Chair.
Cochran.
Madam Chair, this amendment would clarify.
Are we in a quorum call?
We are.
Ask consent that be dispensed with.
Without objection.
Mr. President, Senators Boxer and Vitter have worked hard for days now to come up with a finite list of amendments to complete work on this very important bill, the Water Resource Development Act. So I'm going in just a minute to ask consent that we postpone the vote scheduled for 12 today until 2:30. We'll come back in session, I hope, at 2:15 today. And when we come back in session, I want Senator Boxer, Chairman Boxer, report to the Senate if they've been able to work out an agreement between the two of them. If they do, I want her to ask the consent. And when she asks that consent, if there's an agreement, then we will work through a number of amendments that they've been able to come up with to complete work on this bill. If there's no agreement at 2:15 when she comes in, then we're going to vote at 2:30 on cloture. I hope that can, I hope that's not necessary, but, and we're not going to have any, I'm objecting on behalf of somebody else. If it's not done, I don't care who objects, we're going to move to cloture. That's what this consent agreement has in it, and that's what I believe should be done. It's a lot of work to get this agreement, and I think tentatively it's been done. We know how things work. One senator can block all this. I hope that's not the case. I know the block won't come from our side. Senator Boxer has the complete confidence. All members are of our conference to recognize that she has worked hard on this and has done the right thing as she always does. So I ask unanimous consent that the vote on the motion to vote cloture on S-601 be moved to 2:30 p.m. And I would ask, while she's on the floor, the senator from California, the chairman of this committee, is there anything that I've missed in my statement?
If my friend would yield through the chair. I think you've covered it. Basically, what I want to make sure people know as they go to their various conference meetings this afternoon is that we have a very fair list. I think it probably has more Republican amendments than Democratic amendments. We've done everything to reach an agreement here. But I also want to support my leader here. If there is objection to this important list of amendments, we will go straight to cloture, because this, I just want everyone to understand, without this bill, there will be no more water infrastructure projects, because there's no path forward. Since we ended earmarks, this is the one bill that will make sure there's a path forward. And without water infrastructure earmarks, you can't keep the commerce moving at the ports, you can't do flood control, you can't restore the Everglades or the Chesapeake. So I strongly support what my leader is doing, but I also hope that colleagues will please allow us to move forward, make the cloture vote unnecessary, but we are going to have that cloture vote, if necessary, at 2:30.
President, I ask unanimous consent that the vote on the motion to vote cloture on S-601 be moved to 2:30 p.m. this afternoon. If cloture is invoked, it will be considered as having been invoked at 12 noon.
Without objection, so ordered.
Madam President?
Senator from Virginia.
Thank you, Madam President. I rise today to talk about the continuing efforts by a minority of this body to block the federal budget by blocking a compromise with the House to find compromise. I spoke about this 1 week ago, but the stalemate continues. Today there is an announcement that in my Commonwealth, 90,000 civilian Department of Defense employees and hundreds of thousands of